Hello. This presentation is going to walk you through the basics and the foundational beliefs behind Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. And we in Sanger Unified think that UDL is the way that we need to look through our instruction, the lens by which we view all of our instruction and teaching and learning, so that we can open up access to all and remove barriers for all of our students. At the beginning of this, I'd like you to kind of just think through what your current ability and understanding of being able to describe universal design for learning, where you stand, if on a 1 to 5 scale, kind of where you are in your comfort and your familiarity with the topic of universal design for learning. And I want you to think about that goal. At the end of this presentation, we're going to come back to it and see how well you can achieve this target of describing universal design for learning. Just kind of almost like an overview and agenda for this presentation, we're first going to talk through the foundations of the Universal Design for Learning lens or structure. The 3 foundations are variability, context, and goals. We're then going to go into how Universal Design for Learning actually takes shape and the multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. We call those the UDL guidelines. There are also UDL checkpoints, and those are the actual specific action steps, the things that you can do within the scope of engagement, representation, and action and expression to make sure that Universal Design for Learning is alive in your classroom and in your teaching and learning experiences. So first, obviously you can't chat with the folks around you, but if I were to give you a math problem and I asked the class, almost like in a number talk, the different strategies by which you use to solve the math problem, those strategies are probably going to be different. And that leads us to the first foundation, which is variability. We're not all the same. Everyone has their own, their variability. We are all different. We all have our different strengths and weaknesses, and those strengths and weaknesses come out in different ways. And that variability is diverse, and it's also a wonderful strength. So the backgrounds, the experiences, the fears, the hopes, the dreams, the overall view of the world that everyone has is very diverse, and we are saying that that is a strength. In our classroom, that allows for different perspectives and different viewpoints and being able to apply understanding in a lot of different ways. If we claim that variability is a good thing, then when we look at the typical bell curve, our previous iterations possibly of teaching and learning may have looked at the average, saying like, here, this is a large group, it's here in the center, they're not on the margins, they're not struggling a lot, and they're also not needing to be challenged, so we'll have our instruction live there. And when we do that, we're creating a very narrow pipeline to understanding. We're saying that this way is the only way of doing it. And in Universal Design for Learning, we're actually saying, no, we need to teach to those margins. We need to use the strategies that are used at either end of the spectrum in order to open up that pipeline and create a more wide, equitable access for all of our learners. So if we think about a Rubik's Cube, this is your typical Rubik's Cube. Right now, if I am not able to see colors, this is a very difficult task for me. I mean, it's difficult, period, but it's even more so if I'm blind or if I'm having trouble with eyesight. It wouldn't make sense, though, to then create this Rubik's Cube, this all white with Braille on the side, because again, it's that narrow pipeline. We thought about some population, like people who are blind or have a trouble with eyesight or can read Braille, but now only those people can use it. Whereas if we had thought about design at the beginning, we could have created something like this that has that tactile, the little symbols on each of them that your fingers could touch. So if you weren't able to see, you could use the touch, but it also has color. Plus, it's kind of fun looking. If we think about design from the beginning, trying to erase those barriers and teach to the margins and think about our populations at the margins, we can actually create beautiful, beautiful design. Another way to look at it is right now, that myth of the average. If we were to take the average American woman, their shoe size is between an 8.5 and a 9. But we would never in a million years imagine a world where we only sold shoes based on the average shoe size. Like, you'd never be able to hike or become a basketball star if that was the only shoe size. But because shoe size and foot size is a variable that we can see that variety, it is ridiculous to think that we would only sell one type of shoe. But because our brains, we cannot necessarily see some of the variability, we sometimes don't plan for that variability. So if the first foundation is variability, the second foundation is context. Context tells us that not only are we variable, but the places and the situations that we are put in matter just as much as the variation and the variability that we come into them with. So that's another way of saying the words that are on the screen. And if it's more confusing, I'll just read those. The environments and the situations people are placed in matter just as much as the skills they come with. This is a quote by Albert Einstein. I'm sure you've seen it before, but everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So think about your level of intelligence, your comfort, your familiarity, your excitement about some of these situations. For example, standing up at a podium and giving a public speech. Maybe it's different depending on how big the crowd is, whether the crowd is 20, 100, 500, 1,000 people. Reading a book. Even within reading a book, are you someone who prefers a Kindle, a hardbound, a softback? Would you rather read a fiction, a nonfiction? Doing math, and maybe doing math at a first grade level versus doing math at calculus and having to deal with quadratics. Coding, and whether you can block code and move things around, like I've done the code.org hour of code, or you're looking at coding with HTML, hiking, and you're like, okay, I could do a 2, 3, 5 mile hike, maybe even 7 miles, but would you go for a 5-day backpacking trip? Video games, and whether yours is the Nintendo 64 or the PlayStation, whatever the case may be, how inept or capable do you find yourself within video games? So it's not enough to just say, like, oh, I like to read. Even within that scope, there are so much variation because the context matters. We call this a jagged learning profile. And this is something we've done with our teachers and our students to think through how you would rate yourself on your comfort, your ability, however you want to word it, low, middle, low, medium, or high within these different areas. So reading comprehension, writing narrative, writing expository, numeracy, algebra, geometry. And what you'll find is that for the most part, we have a very jagged learning profile. Not all of us are in the same category for everything. So to recap, foundation 1 is variability, foundation 2 is context, then foundation 3 is that goals matter. And when you have clear goals with a loose means, that's what opens up that access, and we can really allow all of our students and our teachers and all people on all of the margins to have that success. So for example, a fourth grade math standard is that students will use place value understanding to round multi-digit whole numbers to any place. Now, let us be very, very clear. We are not dumbing down this goal. We are not lowering the standards and the rigor and the expectations. We are saying this is the goal, but how can you access that? One way to access that might be on a worksheet, and paper pencil, they're showing you how they're using the place value understanding to round. But I could very well get that same level of understanding whether students can use place value to round if they were to create a whiteboard on a whiteboard app like a Show Me or an Explain Everything or Seesaw, and they're able to show it in that way. Or if they were recording themselves, either working it out or talking through it or a video of themselves, I would be able to see it in that way. They could write almost like a paragraph explaining the steps of how to use place value understanding to round. And as long as they showed me those things and met my non-negotiables, that's okay. They could use place value blocks, manipulatives. There's a lot of different ways to do this. They could even show me on a number line. And the thought is that we are not, sorry, the thought is that we are not lowering the rigor or the standards of the expectation of the goals. We capture our non-negotiables. What are the clear things that need to happen in order to achieve that goal? But yet we are allowing for a loose means. We're allowing for lots of different paths in order to achieve that goal. So the differences in learner variability, the context combined with the rigor of goals, that can expose or create barriers to learning. And that really is at the heart of what Universal Design for Learning is. We're trying to remove, plan for, prepare, and get rid of barriers to learning. Now, how do we do UDL? That's going to be the subject of the next video. So think through where you stand with our initial goal right now, and I'll pull up the slide again. of where you stand with how you could describe universal design for learning. Right now, we've just covered the foundations. And again, those foundational beliefs are variability, context, and goals. And the next video, we'll talk about the guidelines. Thank you.